Hello again, and good evening, good Saturday evening from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. Because this video concerns a convicted British murderer, I try to speak it in a British accent. Mary Bell was an 11-year-old girl when she committed a few murders. And of course, since the year was 1968, and since she was only 11, so a child herself, that was considered very, very shocking. She had been born in May 1957, actually May the 26th, 1957, so she was one day younger than 11 when she committed the first murder on May the 25th, 1968, She was already 11 when she committed her second murder on July the 31st, 1968. The first child whom she murdered was the 4-year-old Martin Brown. The second child was Brian Howe. She strangled both of these little boys, to death. She committed the first murder in Newcastle upon Tyne and the second one in Ware, both in England, United Kingdom. She was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of a diminished responsibility on December the 17th, 1968. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. In other words, only the British monarch, Elizabeth II, and because of Britain's parliamentary system, in effect, government could decide when to release her. Eventually, she was released in 1980. So, she was still technically 10 years old when she committed the first murder, killing 4-year-old Martin Brown, who was found asphyxiated in a derelict house, 85 St. Margaret's Road in the Scotswood district of Newcastle on Saturday, May the 25th, 1968. A local nursery school was broken into a couple of days later. Police investigating the incident found 4 notes, one of which referred to the death of Martin Brown. On July the 31st, 1968, Brian Howe, aged 3, was found dead on waste ground off Scotswood Road. He had been strangled as well, and his body had numerous small cuts on it. The police launched an investigation that took in the interviewing of 1,200 children. 2 girls, Norma Joyce Bell and Mary Flora Bell, despite sharing the same last name, they were not biologically related, gave answers that were suspicious or evasive. Both of them were questioned several times and changed their stories twice. Eventually, each accused the other of squeezing Brian Howe's throat, and Mary accused Norma of making the cuts on his body with a razor blade. Both girls were arrested on August the 5th, 1968, and when charged with murder, Mary replied, apparently showing no remorse at all, "That's all right by me." When Mary Bell was born in May 1957, her mother, Betty Bell, was a 17-year-old prostitute who later married Billy Bell, an armed robber and career criminal. Mary was raised in the depressed area of Scotswood and had a reputation for theft, vandalism, and attacking other children. Well, since especially her father was a criminal, her mother also, well, we may say that at least it wasn't totally inconceivable that she also became a child criminal, although deeply regrettable, yes. We just wonder why the local authorities did not take Mary into custody, since clearly her parents were unable to raise her to become a law-abiding teenager, let alone a law-abiding adult, with a fairly clear sense of the difference between right and wrong. At their trial at the Moot Hall in December 1968, Mary was very confident and self-possessed. Both girls admitted breaking into the school and writing the notes found there. After 9 days of evidence, Norma, who had appeared confused and overawed during the proceedings was found not guilty. Mary was, because of diminished responsibility, found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to life imprisonment. After spending 8 years in Young Offenders Institutes, Mary Bell was transferred to Moore Court Open Prison, from where she escaped with 2 boys in 1977. However, they were caught and rearrested already 2 days later. She was released with a new identity in 1980. In 1998, a biography called Cries Unheard, The Story of Mary Bell was published. There was a furor in the press when it was discovered that she had been paid for her story. Let's see now. When she was released in 1980, she was 23 years old, having served 12 years. She was granted anonymity, including a new name. This seems to be not so uncommon in Britain for the young offenders, to start a new life with her daughter, who was born in May 1984. Bell's daughter did not know of her mother's past until Bell's location was discovered by journalists, and she and her mother had to leave their house with bed sheets over their heads. Bell's daughter's anonymity was originally protected only until she reached the age of 18. However, in May 2003, Bell won a high court battle to have her own anonymity and that of her daughter extended for life. Any court order permanently protecting the identity of someone is consequently known as a Mary Bell order. In 2009, it was reported that Bell had become a grandmother. Bell is the subject of 2 books by Gitta Sereny. The Case of Mary Bell in 1972, an account of the killings and trial, and Cries Unheard, The Story of Mary Bell, 1998, an in-depth biography based on interviews with Bell and relatives, friends, and professionals who knew her during and after her imprisonment. This second book was the first to detail Bell's account of sexual abuse by her mother, a prostitute who specialized as a dominatrix, and her mother's clients. The publication of Cries Unheard was controversial because Bell received payment for her participation. The payment was criticized by the tabloid press, and Tony Blair's government attempted to find a legal means to prevent its publication on the grounds that a criminal should not profit from his or her crimes. Unfortunately, the attempt failed. Bell's brief prison escape was the basis for a Screen 2 teleplay on the British Broadcasting Corporation, Will You Love Me Tomorrow, 1987, starring Joanne Whalley as the tough yet oddly innocent escapee who has come of age behind bars and goes looking for love in a seaside resort town. Bell's case, as well as the murder of toddler James Bulger, was used as the basis for a 1999 episode of Law and Order entitled Killers, spelled with a Z at the end. Holly Hirsch played the Mary Bell analogue. The story was reprised in a 2010 episode of Law and Order UK entitled Broken. Bell's case was also used as the basis for an episode of the short-lived 2005 series The Inside, titled Air Ice. Bell also was the basis for several songs written by extreme metal band Macabre on their 1993 album Sinister Slaughter. Bell's case was the basis for a short story entitled Blue Eyes by Jay Kasselberg that aired on Pseudopod in September 2011. Since she's anonymous, we don't know anything specific about her life, only that she's living somewhere in Britain. We don't know if she's still working, at least part-time, or whether she's fully retired. June Richardson, whose 4-year-old son Martin Brown had been suffocated by Bell in 1968, commented in January 2009. It's all about her and how she has to be protected. As victims, we are not given the same rights as killers. Mary Bell even asked, "Are you looking for Brian?" Brian's sister Pat was worried about the missing toddler who should have been home by then. A small 3-year-old boy with fair hair, Brian Howe usually played close to home. Mary and her best friend Norma eagerly offered to help search for him. They led Pat through the neighborhood, looking here and there, all the while knowing exactly where Brian was. Brian lay dead between the blocks, some large concrete blocks. Mary wanted Pat to discover her dead brother, Norma later said, because she wanted Pat Howe to have a shock. But Pat decided to leave. The Newcastle police would find his body at 11:10 later that night. Brian was found covered with grass and purple weeds. He had been strangled. Nearby, a pair of broken scissors lay in the grass. The wounds were bizarre. There was a terrible playfulness about it, a terrible gentleness, if you like, and somehow the playfulness of it made it more rather than less terrifying, said Inspector James Dobson. Brian's belly had been signed M with a razor blade. This cut would not be apparent until days later. Among the children who stood out as suspicious to the investigators were 11-year-old Mary Bell and 13-year-old Norma Bell. Mary was evasive and acted strangely. Norma was excited by the murder, remembers one authority. She was continuing smiling as if it was a huge joke. As an adult, Mary Bell confessed all that mattered was to lie well. Eventually, Dobson told Gita Sereny, who has written extensively on the case, about Norma Bell. She appeared to see herself in a sort of cliché scenario of cops and robbers film. Nothing surprised her, and she admitted nothing. Dobson continued, I have reason to believe that when you were near the blocks with Norma, when she was questioning Bell, Mary Bell, sorry. A man shouted at some children who were nearby, and you both ran away from where Brian was lying in the grass. This man will probably know you. Mary replied he would have to have good eyesight. Dobson asked, why would he need good eyesight? Trying to catch her in a lie. Because he was, Mary said after a moment, clever to see me when I wasn't there. She stood up. I'm going home. This is being brainwashed. But Dobson wasn't about to let her go. At one point, Mary asked, is this place bugged? In the end, she declared defiantly, I'm making no statements. I have made lots of statements. It's always me you come for. Norma's a liar. She always tries to get me into trouble. The following was Mary Bell's official statement. I, Mary Flora Bell, wish to make a statement. I want someone to write down what I have to say. I have been told that I need not say anything unless I wish to do so, but that whatever I say may be given in evidence. Signed, Mary F. Bell. Brian was in his front street, and me and Norma were walking along towards him. We walked past him, and Norma said, I correct these grammatical errors. In the original, it says, are you coming to the shop, Brian? And I said, Norma, you've got no money. How can you go to the shop? Where are you getting it from? She said, Nebby, keep your nose clean. Little Brian followed, and Norma said, walk up in front. I wanted Brian to go home, but Norma kept coughing so Brian wouldn't hear us. We went down Cross Hill Road with Brian still in front of us. There was this colored boy, so of African or Asian origin probably, and Norma tried to start a fight with him. She said, darky, whitewash, it's time you got washed. Sorry for that racist language. The big brother came out and hit her. She shouted, Howay, put your dukes up. The lad walked away. Lad means a boy in British English, and looked at her as though she was daft. Yeah, this I have to Look up in the Wiktionary. Sorry. Yeah, as if it was foolish or silly. We went beside Dixon's shop and climbed over the railings. I mean, through a hole and over the railway. Then I said, Norma, where are you going? And Norma said, do you know that little pool where the tadpoles are? I mean, young frogs. When we got there, there was a big long tank with a big round hole with little holes around it. Norma said to Brian, are you coming in? Because there's a lady coming on number 82 and she's got boxes of sweets and that. We all got inside. Then Brian started to cry, and Norma asked him if he had a sore throat. She started to squeeze his throat, and he started to cry. She said, there isn't where the lady comes. It's over there by them, by those big blocks. We went over to the blocks, and she said, you'll have to lie down. And he lay down beside the blocks where he was found. Norma said, put your neck up, and he did. Then she got hold of his neck and said, put it down. She started to feel up and down his neck. She squeezed it hard. You could tell it was hard because her fingertips were going white. Brian was struggling and I was pulling her shoulders, but she went mad. Mad means like angry or crazy. I was pulling her chin up, but she screamed at me. So she was trying to place the blame for Brian's murder on Norma. By this time, she banged Brian's head on some wood or corner of wood, and Brian was lying senseless. His face was all white and bluey, and his eyes were open. His Later on, I was helping to look for Brian, and I was trying to let on to Pat that I knew where he was on the blocks, but Norma said, he'll not be over there, he never goes there. Mary's statement, it was a lot longer, I've summarized it. Mary's statement had some partial truths in it, but for the most part was a transparent attempt to blame Norma. Dobson formally charged Mary Bell with the murder of Brian Howe. That's all right with me, she replied. He then arrested Norma Bell, who in anger to the charge declared, I'll pay you back for this. The girls were incarcerated at the Newcastle West End police station. Then Martin Brown. According to Mary Bell's notebook, there has been a boy who just laid down and died. On May the 11th, 1968, yeah, I think it should be a 3-year-old boy was found behind some empty sheds near a pub, bleeding from the head. Okay. He was found by Norma Bell and Mary Bell. The boy was a cousin of Mary's. He had fallen, in quotation marks, off a ledge, landing several feet below. Mary would later admit to having pushed him over the edge. According to the official report on May the 15th, the girls Bell have been warned as to their future conduct. 10 days later, Martin Brown was killed. Or, yeah, actually the date doesn't match. Well, let's see. So Brian Howe, I have to scroll up to it. Okay, yes. So Brian Howe's murder, which actually had occurred on July the 31st, 1968, was described first, and then Martin Brown's murder would follow, although it happened over 2 months earlier on May the 25th, 1968. I'll get it. I understand it. So just 10 days after the warning on conduct, Martin Brown was killed. Norma stated that Mary went to the other girl and said, what happens if you choke someone? Do they die? Then Mary put both hands round the girl's throat and squeezed. The girl started to go purple. I then ran off and left Mary. I'm not friends with her now. But actually, at least in the later murder. Martin was last seen at approximately 3:15 p.m. on May the 25th, 1968, so the day before Mary Bell turned just 11. So this was a case of child killing, or pre-adolescent perhaps, killing a younger child, and was discovered at 3:30 lying on the floor of a boarded up house. 3 boys were foraging for some scrap wood and found the child on his back next to a window. Panicked, they called out to the construction workers outside, who remembered giving little Martin some biscuits earlier that day. Said Mary, or asked Mary. They squeezed through boards to get inside. Mary had brought Norma to show her that she had killed Martin, but they were told to go away. The girls then went to find Martin's aunt to tell her that there had been an accident. They thought it was Martin and that there was blood all over. "I'll show you where it is," said Mary to the distraught woman. Strangely, the police could not find any signs of violence. A bottle of aspirin was nearby, perhaps he ate. There were no visible strangulation marks or any other marks on the child, and therefore the authorities believed his death was accidental, which was tragic. The Criminal Investigation Department was not called in. The official report on Martin Brown did declare that the cause of death was open. The Scots of the condemned buildings in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, the true menace of Scotswood, Mary and Norma, were giving Martin's aunt the creeps with their prying questions. They kept asking me, "Do you miss Martin? And do you cry for him? Does June miss him?" And they were always grinning. In the end, I could stand it no more and told them to get out and not to come back. I wanted to see him in his coffin, said, grinning. Mary's ominous behavior was by no means exclusive to Martin's grieving family. On Sunday, the day following Martin's death, Mary celebrated her 11th birthday by trying to throttle Norma Bell's younger sister. Fortunately, Norma's father saw Mary's stranglehold on the girl. "I chopped Mary's hands away," he said, "and I gave her a clip on the shoulder." The day, however, wasn't over yet. The next morning, the staff at the day nursery at Woodlands Crescent would make a chilling discovery. On Monday morning, May the 27th, 1968, the teachers at the day nursery on Woodlands Crescent at the end of White House Road arrived to find the school ransacked, or broken into. School supplies were strewn about recklessly, and cleaning materials had been splattered on the floor. But the most disturbing discovery was the 4 scribbled notes left behind. "I murder so that I may come back." Yeah. I mean, in 2 of these notes, there was that F word. In both cases, like F off, in both cases misspelled. "We murder, watch out, Fanny and faggot. We did murder Martin Brown. You are micey, you because we murdered Martin. Go Brown, you be beat. I don't know. Look out, there are murders about by Fanny and old faggot, you screws." Police took the notes back to the station and filed them away as a sick joke. Mary would later admit they wrote the notes for a giggle, as if murdering another child was worth a laugh. That same morning, Mary Bell drew a picture in her notebook of a child in the same pose as that in which Martin Brown had been found, with a bottle near him with the word tablet. There was a man walking toward the child. It read, "On Saturday, I was in the house and my mom sent me to ask Norma if she would come up to the top with me. We went up and we came down at Margaret's Road, and there were crowds of people beside an old house. I asked what was the matter. There had been a boy who just lay down and died." Mary's notebook entry did not strike the teacher as odd. Not yet, although he was the only student who wrote on Martin's death. On Friday of the same week, the newly installed alarm sounded off at nursery. Mary Bell and Norma Bell were caught red-handed, but denied breaking in before. Released to the custody of parents, a date was set for them to appear at juvenile court. A week later, Mary attacked Norma near the nursery sandpit. A boy saw Mary scratch her friend and kick her in the eye, but only laughed when he heard Mary scream, "I am a murderer!" She pointed in the direction of house where Martin Brown was found. "That house over there, that's where I killed." Since Mary was well known as a show-off, he didn't take her ominous bragging seriously. In other words, she joked and lied so much that it was difficult to know when she was serious and telling the truth. Toward the end of July 1968, before Brian Howe's murder, Mary visited the Howe household and declared, "I know something about Norma that will get her put away straight away." She told them her secret. Norma put her hands on a boy's throat. It was Martin Brown. She pressed and he just dropped. This insatiable need to show and tell her deadly crimes would be acted out upon another innocent babe. She actually grabbed her own throat in a choking gesture, then left. And a few days later, Mary would strangle the Howe's own child. To one of her guards, Mary Bell defiantly declared, "Murder isn't that bad. We all die sometime anyway." The first night in their small jail cells in Newcastle West End police station, the girls were restless. They kept shouting to each other through the doors. Mary, who had been a chronic bedwetter, was terrified of going to sleep for fear that she might mess her bed. "I usually do," she confided. During the course of her incarceration, the women guards got to know Mary better, describing her as confident, intelligent, and cheeky, so she talked braggingly. Some of Mary's casual comments would shock the police women, but others saw her as a scared little girl who had no comprehension of the enormity of her actions. In the middle of the night, Mary would bolt upright. Mary's hostility had an almost naive quality. While tightly grabbing a stray cat by the neck, a guard told her not to hurt the cat. Mary allegedly replied, "Oh, she doesn't feel that, and anyway, I like hurting little things that can't fight back." In another incident, a policewoman said that Mary said she'd like to be a nurse because then I can stick needles into people. I like hurting people. Was it because Mary was unresponsive that the psychiatrists found her psychopathic? If she had broken her silence and told them of her abusive home life, after all, her father was a career criminal, her mother a prostitute, would she have earned a more sympathetic analysis? "I've seen a lot of psychopathic children," said Dr. Orton, the first to see her during her incarceration, "but I've never met one like Mary, as intelligent, as manipulative, or as dangerous." During the murder trial, Mary's behavior would do little to harvest sympathy. Prosecution's question to Norma Bell: "Well, that was a very naughty thing to do, wasn't it? To think of killing little boys and girls and talk about it." So the trial would last from December the 5th to 14th, 1968. The media attention, although mild by today's sensationalist standards, was generating increasing interest as the trial progressed. By the final day, the British press, or the local British press, was everywhere. Prosecutor Rudolph Lyons opened the trial by suggesting that whoever murdered Brian Howe also killed Martin Brown. Lyons methodically recounted the suspicious behavior of both girls at the scene of Martin's death, how they plagued the mourning family with their morbid questions, and how they vandalized the nursery the next day, leaving notes that amounted to a confession. "How did Mary know that Martin had been asphyxiated?" asked Lyons. "This was not public knowledge, yet she demonstrated to the House how Martin was strangled." Forensic evidence also implicated Mary. Gray fibers from one of her wool dresses were discovered on the bodies of both victims. Fibers from Norma's maroon skirt were found in Brian's shoes. Mary's family presence at the trial certainly didn't help her case. Her mother, Betty Bell, disrupted the proceeding with all her wailing and sobbing, her long blonde wig slipping off her head. She stormed out during the trial, only to dramatically reappear months later. Her father, Billy Bell, sat quietly, ignoring his wife's spectacles. Mary, who Sereny described as very pretty and intelligent with dark hair and sharp blue eyes, which in anger looked emotionally blank. Observers in the courtroom wrote Sereny were watching her with a horrified kind of curiosity. For such a manipulative and cunning little girl, Mary knew nothing about attracting sympathy. At one point, Mary told a police officer, "How a woman up in the gallery smiles at me, but I don't smile back. It isn't a smiling matter. The jury wouldn't like it if I smiled, would they? Well, killing other people, including other children, is never a smiling matter." On the sixth day, Mary was called to the stand. The room buzzed with anticipation, according to Sereny. The public and press galleries were very full. The only day when the atmosphere in the court, unlike all the other days, was faintly tinged with that morbid fascination one associates with certain types of murder trials. Mary was composed and brimming with rationale. Why did Mary ask to see Martin Brown in his coffin? We were daring each other, in other words, urging each other to do something, in this case, murderous or criminal. And one of us did not want to be a chicken, meaning a coward or something, she explained. While Mary conceded that the notes were a joint idea to write, she insisted it was Norma's idea to take them to the nursery. Despite their accusations against each other, the girls had an unfathomable connection that couldn't be understood. During the trial, according to Sereny, their heads turned toward each other, their eyes locked, their faces suddenly bare of expression and curiously alike. They always seemed by some sort of silent and exclusive communion to reaffirm and strengthen their bond. The conviction was obvious. Mary would get either murder or manslaughter. Although there was more sympathy for Norma, it was still unclear how severe her punishment, if any, would be. Legally, this was a question of diminished responsibility. Judge Cusack explained the concept to the jury. In 1957, there was an act of parliament, and it said that where a person kills or is a party to the killing of another, he shall not be convicted of murder if he was suffering from such abnormality of mind as substantially impaired his mental responsibility for his acts. Because Britain was not used to incarcerating little girls who murdered, the question of where Mary should be placed sent everyone scrambling. Prison was out of the question for an 11-year-old. Norma Bell, interestingly, was later given 3 years probation for breaking and entering the Woodlands Crescent nursery and placed under psychiatric supervision. Mental hospitals weren't equipped to take her. She was too dangerous for institutions that housed troubled children. Eventually, the precocious murderers ended up in an all-boys facility. There would be problems down the road when puberty hit. Mary's incarceration was fascinating because at some point she apparently reformed or changed for the better. When she was released at age 23, she went on with her life and had a daughter of her own. She claims to be a completely different person than the psychopathic child killer she once was. Can a violent sociopath be cured? Well, at least through a genuine Christian conversion and then an upright Christian life afterwards. Yes, I do believe. Was it possible that at age 11 she was still psychologically pliable? Was there a moral awakening, as author Gita Sereny suggests? Or is she putting on a really good act? Sociopaths are experts at duplicity. In any case, her experience while incarcerated is worth reviewing. She was housed at the Red Bank Special Unit from February 1969 until November 1973. It was a reform school, a portion of which was high security. Mr. Dixon, James Dixon, a former Navy man who was known for his strong moral influence, provided structure and discipline for Mary, and she came to respect and love him. Betty often visited Mary, and Mary eagerly awaited the opportunities to see her mother. but she always appeared disturbed afterwards and acted out aggressively, according to the Red Bank staff. In 1970, Mary reported to a counselor she had been sexually assaulted by a housemaster, but her account was considered unreliable, although changes in staff were made soon thereafter. Later in 1972, she began provoking the boys and snuck into the boys' dormitory at night. She wounded herself with self-inflicted cuts. After being transferred to a less secure facility in 1977, Mary escaped, but by two young men. 2 days later, she was picked up along with a fellow escapee. As time went on, my nightmare was the press, said Mary. I never could understand what they wanted from me. Mary was moved to a hostel a few months before her parole in 1980, and she met a married man who got her pregnant. Mary Bell was released in May 1980 and stayed in Suffolk. Her first job was in the local children's nursery, but the probation officers deemed this inappropriate work for her. She then became a waitress and attended a university, but was too discouraged to complete her degree. After moving back in with mother, she met a young man and became pregnant. Her child was born in 1984. She was allowed to keep the child, who was technically a ward of the court, until 1992. She insisted if there was something wrong with me when I was a child, and there definitely were many things wrong with her, there wasn't now. I felt that if they could x-ray me inside, they could see that anything broken had been fixed. Somehow Mary Bell had made a transition without appropriate psychiatric treatment from a child killer to a loving mother. Her years in reform school and prison yielded sexual abuse and drug addiction, yet she claims to have a new moral consciousness and deep sorrow for her crimes. Could this be possible? At her trial, a psychiatrist who had examined Mary testified that she exhibited the classic symptom of she certainly showed no signs of being satiated or satisfied after murdering Brian. She was violent toward animals, a chronic bedwetter until her adult years, and while she did destroy property in her brief career as a murderer. A very tragic case. Hopefully she's a very different person now. And of course, we should pray for her salvation and that of the other people involved.